Dzień dobry Państwu, witam w kanale Sobieski, nazywam się Leszek Skiba. Bardzo dziękuję za oglądanie naszych podcastów, za subskrybowanie. Dzisiaj mam ogromną przyjemność gościć pana Wolfganga Münchau, który jest autorem bardzo ważnej, przed chwilą, niedawno opublikowanej książki Kaput, która opowiada o problemach niemieckiego cudu gospodarczego. Rozmowa będzie w języku angielskim. Zachęcam wszystkich do promowania tego filmu i bardzo dziękuję za oglądanie. Hello, welcome to Sobieski channel. It's podcast of Sobieski Institute on YouTube. My name is Leszek Skiba, and I have great privilege to host Wolfgang Münchau, the author of the recently published book Kaput, which explores the end of German economic miracle. In the past, Wolfgang Münchau was editor-in-chief of Financial Times Deutschland. Currently, you can read his work in British online magazine Unheard and also on Euro Intelligence, excellent source of economic insight. Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for being with us.
Leszek, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So maybe I start with the first question. It's about your book, about your thesis. It's widely held view that German economic model was built on four economic, or maybe not only economic pillars. The first was cheap energy from Russia. The second was American security umbrella, which allowed for low defense spending. Third, access to cheap labor in Central Europe. And fourth, large Chinese market for German production. All these advantages now coming to the end, or already disappeared. Why wasn't the economic model not ready for these changes? Why didn't adaptation start earlier?
I mean, what you described was the late stage of the German model, because originally the German model didn't depend on Russia or China. The original German model depended on manufacturing, and it still does to a very large extent. Manufacturing industry, traditional strength of the German economy, that already got into crisis by the time of 25 years ago. And it got into, I will look at it sort of an extended lease of life. It got beyond its sell-by date, if you want to put it this way, and that was the factors that you mentioned. There were sort of fortuitous factors, like East European enlargement. Poland played a huge role in extending the viability of the German model because it supplied Germany not only with cheap labor, but more importantly with skilled labor, because Germany had already the skilled labor shortages was starting in, and East Europe was a wonderful source of skilled labor for the German manufacturing or pre-production manufacturing process. Another advantage was the exchange rate depreciation of the euro that went hand in hand with the Eurozone crisis. That also gave German manufacturing a competitive advantage for a period. And Russia, you mentioned, and China was complementary to Germany. I think here's the change that happened. Now, Russia, we all know. But China's interesting. China was complementary with Germany in the sense that China bought German products and then used the German products to manufacture its own. China, in the beginning, like 20 years ago, did not compete with Germany. But now China competes with Germany, competes in German industrial strengths, like it competes on cars. That's the most famous example. But China competes with Germany on so many other areas as well. Machine tools, all the things that Germany is very good at. China's also doing now. I'm not saying that China is doing everything better or everything cheaper. No, but China is encroaching into German markets, and not only in China and in Germany, but also in third markets where most of the competition is taking place, like in Asian markets or in the United States. So these are the factors that sort of ended this particular phase of the German economic miracle. And what happened, and this is why I call it, I gave the book the dramatic title, Kaput, is that this model isn't just, in difficulty. This model is actually broken now. It's not going to be repaired. It's not going to be resuscitated. Now, the question now is, can Germany find a new model? Can it be sort of, it doesn't have to be, it can still be an industrial model, but it's certainly not a model that is based on China and Russia and based on East Europe. I think this kind of triangulation that they played, that's clearly over.
Yeah, and maybe how do you assess the impact of European Union on Germany? I mean, in Poland we often complain about the high energy prices caused by green energy transformation and at the cost of CO2 emissions. Many regulations which are intended to create common market in Europe are also seen as a burden for business. So can the EU help Germany, or you can say that Germany should reconsider in own economic model separately or independently without thinking about the whole Europe?
Well, the way Germany's relationship with the EU is different from Polish relationship, because what you describe as regulation, I agree with you, excessive regulation, that was actually done because of Germany, because Germany has such an influence in the EU that the EU mirrored the German system. So Germany doesn't have to kind of separate from the EU. Germany has the power, if it wanted to change it. Not alone, it needs partners for that, but Germany's influence in the EU is very strong. So if Germany wanted to change it, it can change it. The problem isn't the EU, the problem is Germany. The EU is more likely to be a problem for you than for Germany, because Germany can influence the EU. So it's not an external issue, but the problem that now arises as we're shifting away from the old model into new models. New model means we need smaller companies, new companies, entrepreneurs. Different business models come up. The EU has a regulatory burden, especially in IT sectors, that make that very hard. For example, if you wanted to found a company that's based on AI, you'll have to struggle with data, because we have data protection laws in Europe that are higher than that of pretty much anywhere else in the world. We have very special laws on AI. We have AI regulation before we have AI. We have already put up the burden for this. Germany has. So if we wanted to turn this around, if you wanted to make this sort of, this leap into flexibility work, we would need to deregulate, and the EU will need to do its part, and it's not doing its part. We're still a long way away from this. So this is why I'm very pessimistic that the Germans will actually manage this. What I do see, however, is that there is a recognition in Germany. It's not my book, not published yet in Germany, but it's, my book is perhaps a contribution to this debate. I noted that some politicians are now talking about it, including Friedrich Merz. During the election campaign, he talked about some of the same themes I've been talking about. AI, regulation, the way the system is working in Germany. It's really very, very old-fashioned. The German economics minister, Katharina Reiche, she's totally aware of these issues. It's not like everyone in Germany is living in the 20th century. That's not true. There's some formidable people in this government. They have a digital ministry. I wrote in the book, Germany doesn't have a digital ministry. Since it was published, they called themselves a digital ministry. These things will change. There will be change, but the essence of this is it is difficult to actually change an economic model. It's really very difficult. The British never managed this after Brexit. Brexit would have required them to do that. They didn't do that. They have the same trickle-down economic model that they had in the EU. It's very hard for a country to change the economic model. Think about your own country. Say you had to change the economic model. Where would you start? At the moment, Poland's very dependent on Germany, and I think this will affect Poland, what's happening in Germany. And suddenly you have to change your economic model. Basically say we have to do different things. We have to specialize in different areas, maybe more services, maybe more value-added parts of components, maybe greater cooperation with China. Who knows? Maybe greater cooperation with Latin America. Who knows? There may be many ways of changing an economic model. It's difficult, and there's a lot of resistance, because these are complicated political systems with coalitions and small parties that make make change very difficult. So I think this thing will still going to take a long time, but I would not blame the EU for what is happening, but the EU is an amplifier of this. And there's certainly a European component in this.
So you can say that that the main obstacle for the changes for the invention of a new economic model is what can be seen inside the economy. It's incumbents, strong position of old industry, more than politicians. Or you can say that politicians are not aware of changes, and they are not, determined to find, to see the future and what is necessary to change.
I mean, this is partially true. I mean, you're absolutely right to say that it is internal. The German model is consensual. That means that the government, industry, and the banks are basically, they hang together, and the whole model works on this cooperation, and the trade unions. It's a very close-knit community of associations, trade unions, government, lobbyists, industries, universities, research. It's all working together. It's like a network. I'm not being conspiratorial here. This is not a conspiracy. It's just basically the way the economy has been organized. Rhenish capitalism, as it has been called at one point. It's basically I call it corporatist, which is slightly pejorative, but it's a form of corporate organization that involves the government and other stakeholders, not shareholders, but stakeholders. And that is sort of the characteristic of one. And the decline of the model is very much of a consensus getting it wrong. Because what normally happens in a competitive economy, if your company believes in the fuel-driven car and my company believes in the electric car, then we compete, and one of us wins and the other one loses. But in Germany, they have a consensus. They don't compete. The two car companies sit down together with the government, together with the unions, and we agree. And we agree that the future is the fuel-driven car. Your company is the bigger one. You basically call the shots, and I basically say, okay, I'll do the same. That's Germany for you. And they colluded. The scandal in the last decade on the emissions cheating software, when they put in software into the car so that when it was tested, it would artificially produce lower emissions. That came out in a test in the United States. They all did this. It wasn't like one person, did it. They all did it. It is because they have, they're cooperating. So this is the resistance. When you have systems where outcomes are the result of collusion, and where that has worked for a very long time. I'm not saying this cannot work. This had worked. This did work. It worked against everything that people predicted, but it worked exceedingly well until it didn't. And that's what I think one has to basically sort of recognize. This is not like some argument about principle. This is an argument about pragmatics. It worked in the analog age of mechanical engineering, but it didn't work in the age of digitalization. There are different kind of competitiveness pressures. Also, for me, the most important thing is finance. The role of the banks. The banks sitting in there, because money is where, money is that power, it's the energy of the system. And if the banks fund the thing, and what does a bank do? It takes in the savings of the country and it transmits them into investments. And they're the intermediates them into investments. And a bank lends against collateral. A bank lends against, for large companies mostly. Banks don't lend to, Google and Microsoft and Apple. They were not bank-funded organizations. They were ultimately creatures of the capital markets. We don't have capital markets in Europe. We have banks. Our capital markets are small by comparison. They don't leverage these massive investments. If you look at the stuff that's coming at us, AI, which is the biggest thing, massive, medical research. This isn't done by small companies. This isn't done by banks and traditional companies. There may be new companies coming up in all of these areas. All the tech companies in the United States are very new companies. The newest of the German companies is from 1970. It's 50 years old, 55 years old. It's SAP. It's a very successful company. But there hasn't been anything since. So the system needs to open up to new competition, to new companies. Without a change in the financial sector, this is not going to happen. I mean, I could give you a very long list of the things they need to do. But if I give you only one thing they need to do, I'd say open up finance. Then things will happen. Because then, as people fund different projects, the politics will change, jobs will change, public debate will change. This will not happen through politics from above. It has to happen through the markets. And that's why, for me, this is by far the most important thing.
Yeah, the next question will be about fiscal rules and fiscal policy in Europe and Germany. You see these fiscal rules as the obstacle for constraint for active investment policy, but also you support the idea of fiscal union in Europe. We see the limited trust in Brussels now in Europe. Do you believe that deepening fiscal union is possible in the European Union?
No, it's not possible. I've been advocating it for a long time, but those like me who advocate, we lost the battle. The difference between me and the other people who are advocating is that I admit that we lost the battle, and others are not admitting it yet or not recognized it yet. But it's too late for this. And it ended with a Eurozone crisis. That was the moment to have done this, and not having done this, it was the fateful decision that they took, and it means that the fiscal union will not happen. And the fiscal union is quite critical, because the fiscal union, this is essentially a political union. Because fiscal plus monetary, that's politics, no? So we're dealing with your economic policy is basically centralized at that point. Now that is a requirement for a capital markets union. You're not going to have a deep capital market with fragmented currencies and fragmented sovereign debt. You need the U.S. capital market is backed by the US dollar, the US Treasury. That's why it's so deep. It's not like a set of rules. It's not like if we take on American rules, we'll have a strong capital market.
And bond market.
Yeah, the bond market. You need the bond market, you need the currency, you need the deep integration of the capital markets. And that can only happen in a political union. It cannot happen in this diversified multilateralist construction that the EU has become. So nobody, a bondholder will always ask who is the other side, who is the debtor, and if this debtor is, who is ultimately responsible for this. And if people say, I don't know, it's the European Council, and there isn't a phone number, I don't treat this as sovereign debt. It's not sovereign debt. So anything that the EU issues at the moment, like the recovery fund, is not sovereign debt. It's sub-sovereign debt. So we don't have this in place. And we're not going to have this in place because it requires political union and countries willing to give up national sovereignty. And we don't even have to, discuss whether it's desirable or not. I personally believe it is. But we also have to come to realize that there isn't a majority in Europe. And, we can say maybe it's a majority worth fighting for. Maybe that's a political agenda. But I don't see this, I don't see any. There's Volt, a small party that is in favor of radical European integration. Beyond that, I don't see any, people talk about, they're pro-European, but what does it mean? Mm. They're pro, what are they pro? Pro what? Membership of the EU? Sure, okay. But they're not pro, they don't have any ideas. They don't have any ideas of what to do. And the currency, the fiscal union is clearly not on their list. So when they say they're pro-European, I think it's a meaningless phrase these days. So the EU is what it is. And the EU as it is cannot create a meaningful financial union because it is not a political union. And that's what sovereign debt is. Sovereign debt is the interlink between politics and finance. And the reason why financial markets treat sovereign debt as special is because it's political. It's because, the debtor, the country that issues the sovereign debt, can raise taxes and it can issue bonds. It has powers to raise money. It can't go bankrupt. It can always repay the debt if it agrees to raise more debt or if it agrees to impose taxes. So while some countries don't do that, at least they have the power. Whereas a company is different. A company can go bust. A company can go bankrupt. A sovereign country cannot go bankrupt. A sovereign country might choose to default on its debt, but at least it has the ability to service its debt. And that's the difference. And the EU is not that country. The EU is not in that position. So all the constructions we have, all the hopes we had for Europe, pro-Europeans like myself, have basically been, I wouldn't say disappointed, but they took decisions during the Eurozone crisis, and Germany was at fault here. Germany be very reluctant to actually find solutions for this problem. It's not about bailout. It's not giving money to others. It's about creating, the solution to the Eurozone crisis, the long-term solution would have been to create a layer of federal debt, not to do what happened in the end, which is what basically the ECB bailing out by just buying the national debt. That's the worst thing, because now that is essentially a transfer. And the more transfers you do, like the recovery fund, the harder it gets, because the political opposition to European integration rises, because people don't like transfers. People don't like to pay other countries. The only acceptable way to do this is to do this at a federal level, where the issue isn't Germany giving money to whatever, Italy. The issue there is, we'll raise the taxes for the rich and we'll invest it in AI centers, and we put the AI centers here and there. It may in the end be a transfer from Germany to Italy if you put the AI center in Italy, but it could also be a transfer from Italy to Germany. It can go in all directions, and that's what federal spending is, and that is what they decided not to do.
Maybe last question about Poland, and a question to you about your advice to Polish economic policy. One thing is euro. Euro is not popular in Poland. Poland is the largest country outside the Eurozone, and still Poland has own macroeconomic flexibility, because we have flexible exchange rate, we have independent monetary policy. But the question is also about macroeconomic policy, not only in area of monetary policy or adoption euro, but about competitiveness of Polish economy, competitiveness of Polish companies, strong ties with German economy, German model. What would be your advice to Poland, to Poles, regarding macroeconomic policy?
Yeah, I mean, the first advice is that you do not join the euro for economic reasons. If you want to join it for political reasons, because you believe in European integration, this is a political decision. The euro is a political project, but it's kind of as a political problem, it's a half-completed project. But it is essentially, you can replicate, if it was just economic, you can replicate the euro through entering the exchange rate mechanism. If the stability, exchange rate stability was your main goal, but you didn't agree with the politics of the EU, you can always tie your currency to the euro. Even have a currency board. There's many constructions that allow you to do this. I don't think that would be a good idea, frankly, because I think what we're seeing globally now is from a purely economic point of view. And if you have no intention to actually integrate into Europe further than you are already, then obviously joining the euro makes no sense, and it would deprive you, as it deprives everyone, on some economic freedoms. And the freedom to devalue is important to stay competitive, especially if this devaluation were to coincide with no relative increase in inflation. So if you could maintain a low rate of inflation. To have an independent monetary policy, especially since your fiscal policy is independent, it certainly makes sense. I would, there is at the moment something that's going on. The euro is appreciating against the dollar. It's quite a strong appreciation that happens. I have not followed the zloty-euro exchange rate, whether zloty has fallen against the euro, or whether it's also appreciating against the dollar. I don't know the latest developments, but I would certainly I would certainly not tie myself to the euro at this point, and would be very happy if the euro were to appreciate against the zloty in the current circumstances. So you keep a relative competitiveness. But more seriously, that's just a very tactical, short-term consideration. More seriously, the difficulties that Germany is facing, has a challenge for Poland because the dependence on the German economy is going to be a problem. I think one should not assume that the Germans will. It's a supply chain thing. So if the main company in Germany leaves, say, Germany and goes to the United States, the supply chain will change.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can maintain this, or the hope that Germany is because Germany has some problems, they shift the production to Poland. I don't think that will happen either. I think the issue is deeper. Isn't just cost. So it isn't just. That's not something I would expect to happen. I wouldn't expect Germans to shift productions to Central Europe in any sort of large numbers. The issue is very much a deep competitiveness issue to do with the products, to do with innovation, to do with the technical edge. And I would probably, my advice would be to invest in these things. My advice would be to become an AI nation, to the extent that you have the ability. Now, Poland has, like Germany, national constraints. Poland does not have natural sources of energy. We are basically all in the same boat. The best energy we have is wind. There's a lot of wind in certain parts of Poland. There's not so much wind in other parts of Poland. It can get very hot, as it was yesterday. But then, it's not. We are not sunny. We're not a sunny part of the world. So we have to think our energy. Obviously, nuclear power might play a role in this energy mix. But the next generation of technology, AI in particular, requires a lot of energy. And that requires, some really forward-looking thinking of how do we get the energy, where do we put the data centers. So maybe in Europe even we will not be able to have data centers in every country. Maybe we have to pool our resources and saying, okay, Spain may be the best country to do it because Spain has the sun, it has the space, and if we can plaster Spain with solar panels, it could generate massive amount of energy. But that's where our data centers is, or maybe even the Sahara Desert. If we find it safe, we find a safe way of transmitting the data and of obviously ensuring security of supplies. So one would have to sort of think outside of the box a little bit on this. And obviously Russia will not be part of that. That's the politics of it. That would have possibly been a solution in some other geopolitical scenario that we are clearly not in now. So I think there has to be some solution. But again, I don't think there is a national solution to this because we don't have the energy. So I would keep flexible. I would keep into alliances. I would make sure that and I think the big lesson to be learned from Germany is not to make yourself too dependent on others and keep a certain nimbleness and flexibility about your friends.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for being with us for the discussion. We can hope that the German Poland and whole Europe will find its own economic models, and the growth will go back to Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leszek.